Secretary, when any government is appointing an ambassador, there is a security and a vetting process. That process is gone through by officials, and of course it was gone through for the appointment of Peter Mandelson. The truth is, all the issues were weighed, and in that time it was known that Peter Mandelson...
David Lammy's bold prediction, Labour's two-decade dominance. Right then, before we dive into what might be the most audacious political prediction of the decade, do us a favor and smash that subscribe button. Trust me, you will want to be notified when the next political earthquake hits, and with the way things are going in Westminster, that could be any moment now. David Lammy has just made a statement that's either breathtakingly confident or spectacularly delusional, depending on your political persuasion. The newly minted Deputy Prime Minister has declared that Labour will be in power for more than 22 years this century. 22 years. Let that sink in for a moment. That's not just ambitious. That's bordering on the fantastical in a democracy where governments typically fall faster than a poorly constructed house of cards. But here's the twist that makes this story absolutely fascinating. Lammy made this declaration whilst the Labour government is simultaneously executing the most dramatic cabinet reshuffle we've seen in years, prompted by Angela Rayner's rather embarrassing exit over stamp duty irregularities. Nothing says confidence like predicting decades of dominance whilst your Deputy Prime Minister is being shown the door for financial improprieties. The irony is delicious, isn't it? Here's Lammy, speaking at the Global Progress Action Summit about optimism and purpose, essentially claiming Labour will rule Britain for the next 2 decades, whilst his own government is frantically rearranging deck chairs after a ministerial scandal. It's either masterful political theatre or a spectacular case of tone-deaf timing. Let's examine what's actually happening beneath the surface of this reshuffle, because the scale of changes suggests this isn't just about replacing Rayner. When Keir Starmer shuffles nearly his entire cabinet, keeping only a handful of ministers in their original positions, that's not routine maintenance. That's panic mode. That's a Prime Minister who's looked at the polling data, seen Reform UK dominating summer headlines, and decided drastic action is required. The appointment of Lammy as Deputy PM is particularly intriguing. Here's a man who's gone from Foreign Secretary to Deputy Prime Minister and Justice Secretary simultaneously. That's not just a promotion, that's a consolidation of power around Starmer's inner circle. When you're predicting 22 years of dominance, you need your most trusted allies in the most crucial positions. Yvette Cooper's move from Home Secretary to Foreign Secretary creates another fascinating dynamic. Cooper is widely respected for her competence, but moving her from domestic security to international relations whilst the government is struggling with immigration issues suggests either supreme confidence in Shabana Mahmood's abilities or recognition that foreign policy might be easier to manage than the small boats crisis. Speaking of Mahmood, her promotion to Home Secretary is perhaps the most significant appointment in this entire reshuffle. She's been handed what many consider the poisoned chalice of British politics, immigration policy. The small boats issue alone has destroyed more political careers than a Westminster scandal sheet. If Lammy's prediction of 2 decades in power has any chance of materializing, Mahmood needs to solve what her predecessors couldn't. The creation of Pat McFadden's enhanced Department for Work and Pensions, now encompassing housing, communities, and skills, represents something more significant than administrative reshuffling. This is institutional architecture for long-term governance. You don't create super departments unless you're planning to be around long enough to see them succeed or fail spectacularly. But let's address the elephant in the room. Lammy's prediction of 22 years in power flies in the face of modern British political history. The Conservatives managed 13 years under Thatcher and Major, and that was considered an extraordinary run. Blair's Labour achieved 13 years, and that required a political genius at the helm in favourable economic conditions. What exactly does Lammy know that makes him believe this iteration of Labour can double those achievements? The timing of this prediction is particularly curious given the government's current struggles. Labour is faltering in the polls, Reform UK is capitalising on immigration concerns, and the government has just been forced into welfare policy reversals after backbench rebellions. These aren't typically the circumstances that inspire confident predictions of generational dominance. Perhaps Lammy is engaging in strategic political messaging, projecting confidence to demoralize opponents and inspire supporters. Political psychology suggests that parties which appear destined for long-term success often create self-fulfilling prophecies. Voters, donors, and talent gravitate towards perceived winners. By declaring Labour's inevitable dominance, Lammy might be attempting to manufacture the conditions that make it reality. Alternatively, he might possess insight about demographic trends, electoral mathematics, or strategic positioning that justify such optimism. The Conservative Party is certainly in disarray, potentially facing years in the wilderness whilst they resolve fundamental questions about their identity and purpose. If Labour can successfully navigate current challenges whilst the Conservatives remain divided, extended dominance becomes theoretically possible. The reshuffle itself provides clues about Labour's strategy for achieving Lammy's ambitious timeline. The appointment suggests a focus on competence over ideology, pragmatism over idealism. Starmer is building a government designed for longevity, not revolutionary change. Revolutionary governments burn bright and fast. Competent administrations endure. The return of Douglas Alexander as Scottish Secretary is particularly telling. Alexander brings experience from the Blair years, institutional memory, and Scottish political credibility. His appointment suggests Labour is taking seriously the challenge of maintaining Scottish support whilst potentially facing a resurgent SNP narrative about independence. The gender milestone of having women occupy the 3 great offices of state beyond number 10 represents more than symbolic progress. It signals Labour's commitment to representing modern Britain's diversity whilst potentially appealing to female voters who've increasingly abandoned Conservative Party. However, several factors complicate Lammy's optimistic scenario. Economic challenges remain formidable, with growth targets appearing increasingly unrealistic. Immigration continues to be a dominant political issue with no easy solutions. International instability, from Ukraine to the Middle East, creates unpredictable diplomatic and economic pressures. Any of these factors could derail long-term political plans. Moreover, predicting electoral success 22 years into the future assumes static opposition. The Conservative Party won't remain permanently damaged. Reform UK might evolve into a more sophisticated political force, and entirely new political movements could emerge. British politics has demonstrated remarkable capacity for surprise and transformation. The most intriguing aspect of Lammy's declaration is what it reveals about Labour's internal confidence despite external challenges. This isn't a government merely hoping to survive the next election. It's a government planning for decades of power. That level of ambition either reflects genuine strategic insight or dangerous overconfidence. Time will ultimately judge whether David Lammy is a political prophet or simply another politician whose reach exceeded his grasp. What's certain is that his prediction has established a benchmark against which Labour's success will be measured for years to come. Whether Labour achieves Lammy's ambitious timeline depends on factors far beyond Westminster reshuffles, economic performance, international stability, social cohesion, and the fundamental question of whether competent administration can inspire sufficient public loyalty to sustain multi-decade dominance in an increasingly volatile political landscape. The next few years will reveal whether David Lammy's bold prediction represents visionary leadership or spectacular miscalculation. Either way, British politics just became considerably more interesting. If you found this analysis compelling, you know what to do. Subscribe to UK Connors for the inside track on British political developments. Because in Westminster, today's reshuffle is tomorrow's historical footnote, and we'll be here to decode every